Hello, viewers. Welcome and thank you for joining us on another episode of Unmute by Verse 1. I am Workin, and today we'll have Eric Allen, whose voice has been bringing a lot of joy and pleasure to many people, myself inclusive. So, welcome, Eric.
Well, thank you, Workin. We do like to bring joy and pleasure to people,
and you're doing a damn good job of it, I must say.
Well, thanks, man.
I want to know what inspires your art. I know this is a question you get asked a lot, but I want to know what has made Eric the man and also Eric the musician.
I'm generally looking back into my past and childhood, usually, or my dreams of today, I guess you would call it. And somehow, some way, this always turns out to be a melody or lyrics, you know. It's always music, because I was playing music when I was 3-4 years old. So it never comes out in like painting or anything. It's always through music. So if I am thinking about something, a childhood memory or a friend from childhood, a lot of times this can turn into a song. It won't be the literal match, you know, but it will somehow wind its way into the art, the song. So it's usually coming from me some way or the other.
How old were you when you wrote your first song, or
when I wrote my first song?
Yeah, or performed your first song, if it's not the same. So let's start with the writing and then the performance.
Well, I'll start with the performance. I started performing when I was about 4 years old in my dad's band, playing harmonica. It was a C harmonica, so every single thing I played was in C. So I'm not sure if I was in the right key or if the band always changed their key to C or what, but nobody cared. It was a 4-year-old child, you know, you can't do wrong. I wrote my first song I was probably in my 20s, but I didn't ever like any of the songs I wrote until my 40s, you know. Yeah, this went on a long time where I would write, not like it, then there'd be a period, because I worked other types of jobs for a long time, and I never really liked the songs that I was writing. It wasn't until I had a lot of personal things happen in my life, you know, like my father passing and my sister's house burning down, things like that, that I started being able to write songs that I liked. So
there's a lot to dive into from what you've just given. First, I would, off the top of my head now, is the reputation of blues. What is it about blues that lends itself well to very emotional, some might even say sad music? There's something about it. What is it? What is it about blues that just draws out this?
Most people, when they hear about blues, they think sad, and they think that the blues artists themselves are basically a little crazy. Womanizers, drinkers, all this stuff. You know, I never thought it was sad music. When I hear blues, it makes me feel really good. Slow blues, fast blues. I never get sad about blues. And there was Townes Van Zandt, one of my favorite songwriters ever, once had a line about the blues. He said, if you watch the people as they go into the show, they're not saying too much to each other. But when they leave the show, they're talking to each other much more, because what they've been hearing, the songs they've been hearing, they can identify with in their real day-to-day life. You know, whether you consider it happy, sad, or whatever, you can identify with it. And that's what blues is to me. You can identify with its very basic level identification in emotions, you know. It's not trying to be super happy. It's not trying to be really anything. It's just kind of telling you the truth.
It just is
what it considers the truth. And I think it reaches a lot of people that way, which is what it's meant to do.
I think that's an insightful response, because rarely do you find a blues artist that's corny, so to speak, you know, like just contriving fictitious existence. There's always something about blues. Would you say that is grounding? There's something that's grounding about the music.
There is usually from You talking about the artist, like a blues artist? Usually?
Well, just the genre in general.
I do think you have to have lived a certain pain, I guess, in your life to be able to express your music and your lyrics through art. I think that goes for a lot of genres, not just blues, but I think especially with blues, I feel like if you're not willing to delve into yourself, and then expose yourself to others when you put the art out there, then it won't come out right. You can't force it. And blues doesn't have to be forced, man. You can just play 2 notes on a guitar in a bar. I mean, a bar of music, or just sing a few lines, and you can, make everybody feel it. You don't have to do that much. A lot of times, less is more.
Would you say blues is a lyric-heavy genre rather than the music-heavy genre?
No, I wouldn't say that. A lot of blues songs, of course, blues, just the pattern of blues is usually a verse. The line is repeated. The first 2 lines often are the same, and often verses are repeated. So the lyrics are less involved, let's say. The music is usually where the feel comes from, If I'm singing a blues song live, and people will be, I always remember all the words. And I'm like, well, I don't really have to in blues. I normally do, but if I don't, I just repeat a verse. I just make something up even. But probably my songs that I write are probably at the most half blues. A lot of my songs are stories that have quite a bit of lyrical content, and it's pretty lyric heavy.
It's interesting, or I like the fact that you mentioned the stories,
Mm-hmm.
because when I listened to the album, we'll get to that a bit, I left with the impression that he has one talented storyteller with a guitar. It felt like, even the way the songs were arranged, the sequence or the order of the songs felt like a story. Would you accept this description?
Oh, I'm glad you think that, because people don't realize I put some time into the order of the tracks for an album, and a lot of people will say it doesn't matter anymore because it's all online and people just jump around from song to song, or they just buy one song. But I'm just still old school. I believe that the order of the tracks on the album matter, because I still believe in listening to an album. And I know a lot of people don't, but I go with what I feel. And so I put some time into that. I'm glad to hear that.
My connection to that album, Moose Jaw, is
Moose Jaw.
Moose Jaw is my connection to that. To that album.
Were you running liquor over borders?
Well, I guess I'm too young to have participated in that lucrative venture.
And Diamond Jim.
But I've been to the caves or the tunnels that were built. Uh-huh. I live in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
so it's the Canada.
Which is 100 kilometers to Moose Jaw. So when I saw Moose Jaw, I'm like, what?
So when you saw Moose Jaw, you actually thought of the city.
Yeah, exactly. I thought of the city, and I thought of Al Capone.
Yeah,
that's unfortunately the most the biggest association with a city. So tell me, why did you choose that subject?
That subject actually runs a little bit through the album. There are 3 songs in particular on that album that talk about trends and in terms of history. I mean, actual history, not fictional, from the U.S. and Canada. And Moose Jaw is one of the 3. So I kind of was in a space when I was writing this album. And also, this album, somehow, some way, most of these songs were written within about a 3 or 4 week period. I don't know why. It just all hit me at one time. And one of the themes that hit me was, because I have always liked trains, and old trains especially, because you can ride an old train for a long time and see the countryside and whatever, and talk to strangers. And so I wrote Itinerant Blues about the Great Depression, the hobo life. Then I wrote Moose Jaw, also from that time period, and then Short Line Rag, which was from when the Transcontinental Railroad was being built in the U.S. So Moose Jaw came out of that. It was just one of the things one of the three. And I remember I had this thing in my head at one point, and I was, yonder come, and I kept hearing it in my head. And I think it comes from the music I listened to when I was younger too. That's where Moose Jaw started. Yonder come, and eventually I wrote some lyrics around it. The actual specific Moose Jaw part came from the Sioux Line coming out of Chicago. I knew about the Sioux Line coming out of Chicago and going through Minnesota, and it would go up into central Canada.
Yeah.
And of course, there's and there's always been stories about that because the gang, the Capone gang, North Side, South Side, North Side, all that gangs in Chicago during the Great Depression, and what they were doing and how they were doing it. And so I said, well, it's a very interesting story. And if you go and look at even the locals up there, you get people say it's true, people say it's not, people say some of it's true.
I've seen the relics, if we could say so. If my word means anything, I tell you it is true.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of views, but where you have a lot of views, you also have legends, and you have all the tunnel, and there are tunnels there. To me, it's a completely believable scenario for that time.
It did make sense. It did make business sense to run the operation that way. And have you been to Moose Jaw? Really?
I have not been to Moose Jaw.
You should. I mean, I think they probably should be playing your song
I agree with you.
during the tours, because I don't know how many songs have been written about Moose Jaw.
Yeah.
I mean, Moose Jaw, even many Canadians don't even know where Moose Jaw is. So Saskatchewan is a remote think of as boondocks or the backwaters, and Moose Jaw is even a small city in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
So to have a song that essentially immortalizes that is something that I think, it just caught my eye right away.
Well, let your Moose Jaw contacts know.
I will.
Try to get that played on some tours. That would be good.
I'll do the best I can.
It's a small prairie town, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been there, but I can imagine because I've been to many small prairie towns in the U.S. down below.
And in the Western Canada as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I listen to your album, the lyrics, the music, there's one word just kept coming to mind, and it is movement. Now you mentioned the trains. I was like, oh, maybe I'm onto something. But even in the music, there's usually a transition. It's almost like you make the listener comfortable and just like rev or accelerate. What fascinates you about movement? That's one. And two, am I correct in my perception?
On this album, I tried to keep things moving and moving in not necessarily the same direction all the time. That album is there's things like Prowlin Lobo, which move very quick, and then you've got some things like Ball in the Street, and so it does shift directions. And when I consider the order of the tracks, I'm always considering the movement and the shift in direction. I don't want things to be over here for 4 songs and then suddenly it switches and it goes completely different for 4 more. I like to mix them up. I think it makes it more interesting for a listener. And again, I'm thinking about it in terms of somebody listening to 13 tracks straight. And I know that most people don't. But this is still how I'm going to think about it, because when I was growing up, we listened to albums. When I was a teenager, we bought albums. And so that's where I came from, and it's still the way I think about things. I think the first album did not have as much movement as the second album. There's a lot more slower songs on the first album. Even the faster ones, Rattlesnake Mom on the first album, Holy Rollin, were recorded at a slower pace. And so on the second album, I said, I just feel like I want to turn it up. And if the train songs try and have a train feel, and I think Moose Jaw worked out pretty well to have that train feel. Yeah. And so I watched my speed. I like the BPMs in the studio and things. I was pretty picky about for the second album because I wanted to make sure that the speeds were the way I wanted them to feel.
Earlier, you said most of this album or the writing happened in a 4-week period. Is this typical, or you just had this popple part?
It wasn't typical on the first album. Those songs were written over a much longer period of time, and there were 4 songs left over from the first album that I didn't put on the first album, and those
Did you make
were
it
all,
to the second?
Yeah, that I put on the second album, and so those were not written in that time. But the other 9 songs, yeah, they were written in a very short amount of time. It wasn't planned. In fact, for a while, I was like, if you don't have any ideas, if you don't have any inspiration and feeling on art, it can happen. But the best thing you can do is just wait. And if it doesn't come, wait some more. It's a famous quote of a guy named Charles Bukowski, which I really like. This guy, famous writer, like a drunkard writer from L.A. And I agree with that. You have to have faith. You have to believe and have faith that it's going to come, and it did. And it just came like a flood. It was really kind of incredible. It came like a flood. I don't know what's going to happen on the next project, the next album, as far as will it all come at once or no. I don't know. But as long as it keeps coming.
Hopefully.
In some way.
So now what happens? I can imagine someone who's waiting and the writer's block or whatever, or the artist's equivalent or a musician's equivalent of a writer's block. It must be frustrating.
Well, I don't think it's so frustrating. I don't sit down to write songs in the first place, because every time if this is what I was doing earlier when I never seemed to like any of my songs I wrote, I was actually trying, sitting down, trying to write. Never worked for me. It won't work for me. So I don't feel frustration because I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just walking around doing my whatever I do every day, and I'm just kind of waiting for the inspiration to hit. And it can hit anywhere, anytime, and I have to stop what I'm doing and make some kind of record of it, a phone memo recording of the melody or whatever, just something. Otherwise, it'll disappear.
So I usually like asking musicians, for you, what comes first, the lyric or the music?
Well, I think the music more so.
So you tend to write to the music.
Well, you know what happens, and this happened a lot on the last album, and it's happening now a lot too, is I have lots of melodies that are, some of them are a little fleshed out, and some of them are totally fleshed out. I got the whole song written musically. And I've got an idea kind of in my head of a general idea about what I want to say in this song, but I haven't necessarily gotten specific about it. And a lot of times what ends up happening is I've recorded these melodies and I listen to them in the headphones. I was doing it on the way over here today. I'll listen to them in the headphones on the train or whatever, over and over, for who knows how long it'll be. Eventually, I will start hearing lyrics or ideas, but sometimes it's actual lyrics. I'm not trying, and that's the key. Don't try. To me, that's the key. I tell people in songwriting, I know it's not like what you're gonna like. If you're teaching a songwriting class, you're don't try.
Yeah, try.
Class over, semester over. They're not gonna like that, But that's the way it seems to work for me, The melody on the guitar, I have to try a little because I have to work it out on a guitar. But the lyrics, a lot of times, they just start coming to me if I keep listening to that melody. And I personally like that, if you want to call it a system. I like it because I think the lyrics that come to me always fit the feel of the melody. That's why they're coming to me. So the feel fits. Like your Moose Jaw lyrics end up fitting to the feel of the melody. Kind of a train beat. Then Moose Jaw also speeds up and slows down.
Yeah, that's why I said there's movement. I
Yeah.
can just there's a sense of movement that it just jumped a bit listening to the songs.
And that's
why I wrote it down, because I try when I listen to songs, or just not only music, I try to find one word. It's a process that makes me really think about stuff, and that was the word that kept coming. First I had drifting, but movement, drifting seemed aimless and not deliberate. But movement, like this is deliberate.
It was after a while. It was a little bit like when I first wrote the music. Well, actually, Moose Jaw, the first lyrics came first. Some of the Yonder Come came first, but then in the music and then the rest of the lyrics. As I kept developing that song, the movement, the speeding up and slowing down, I decided to pronounce it even more because I felt like it gave the feel of an old train, which is going to chug along, and at times it's going to build steam, build speed, and other times it's going to go slower, right? So I just felt like it kind of fit.
Now we've established movement in your music. I want to establish the movement of the man.
Oh, right.
Because you're from Indiana, and here we are in the capital of the forest. I mean, Beijing is it's not exactly next door to Indiana. So, in
any way.
Yeah, some movement has happened. I want to tell me about that, because you're well-traveled. First propelled you out of Indiana.
I've always had a desire to travel, and by travel I mean live in other places. I remember when I was 10 years old, I was watching a Saturday Night Live comedy show on TV in Indiana, and I don't know why. Saturday Night Live is from New York City. I think actually the movement, just like some of the musical influence, may come from my vision, which is not very good. Because I wasn't able to do things that other people in small town in the Midwest could do growing up, like drive a car or work in a factory, join the military. And that is a huge percentage of what people end up doing. Young men, when they get to be 18 years old. Those were completely cut off to me from the start. So I knew I had to do something different. I had to go to college, basically, to be able to, because I didn't want to stay there and work in a convenience store, on my whole life. I think that drove me to go to college, eventually go to law school, and to move away from the small town. And I don't have a problem with the small town. I still go back there. I have friends back there. But it's hard when you cannot do those kind of things. It's harder. And so I always wanted to be in a place where I felt like I was equally on par with other people in terms of my movement, getting around. Like New York City, you don't have to drive a car. Just like you don't here. You don't have to here either. Because of all the public transportation. So I ended up, after a few stops along the way, I ended up in New York, and I loved it there. Loved New York. But then I got that itch after about 9 or 10 years there.
That's usually when it comes.
Yes. I didn't think, if you had asked me the first 4 or 5 years, I said, no, I'm never leaving Manhattan. I loved it, and I still do. But I would have never believed, but yeah, it still happened. And the itch started with just wanting to start traveling overseas more. I had traveled overseas, but not very much. And it wasn't ever, it was more of a tours and in Europe, which there's a lot more to see than that. And I wanted to. And so I ended up traveling more and more overseas. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to really travel. And I left my job in New York and traveled a couple years, just kind of backpacking around, in Southeast Asia and East Africa and the Middle East. And here, I like China because China really has the most opportunity. It has lots of opportunities and very civil place, and it just seemed good. Beijing was big enough to provide whatever I wanted,
So how much of your travels make their way to your music? I imagine Beijing has a lot of subjects that will do well.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember Beijing influencing any of my music. My music is very Americana. It's very folksy, rootsy Americana. People like to call it blues, but and some of it is straight blues. But most of it is a combination, and if you roll them all up and you try to put a tag on it, the most likely tag is Americana, or roots, people like to say now. And so it doesn't really, I wrote one song about a story in China. That wasn't actually the the subject was from Beijing. So I guess in that way, She Waits does come out of Beijing. And then Fire in the Canyon off the second album, it's not about China in particular, but it does use some Chinese instruments.
That's the second thing second area I wanted to explore, the music. Because, I mean, you've been to the Middle East, you've been to East Africa, drums, strings.
It hasn't happened.
Which of those? Or is it going to happen soon?
Well, I'm glad it's there because it's still there for me to tap. I don't know if it'll happen or not. I couldn't tell you.
So we're waiting for the muse of inspiration.
You know, I think right now where I'm at seems to be, I'm thinking more of solo. Like just working me and a guitar on the next album. I will see what happens. I mean, it's not easy to do it because you get in the studio and you start hearing other things, and mandolin would sound great here. But as far as the influences from the other parts, no, that hasn't happened. It's been very American centric with a little bit of China, but it's not like the China like people write songs about hutongs, the hutong blues or something, you know, and it's never like that. I haven't had the inspiration. I had an inspiration about one war hero, war correspondent who went missing, and I wrote a song about him. And that came from my job where I edit books for a Chinese publisher, and I was editing a few books about this person, and that inspired me to write that song.
So, well, I guess China's made its way to your music.
It's been what?
So China's made its way to your music.
It's made its way in. I think it's not the big way, but it's made its way in. Yeah, a bit. Yeah, but I really think I'm just as kind of good old boy Midwestern in my influences in music.
What's your biggest influence, musically speaking?
Who?
Yeah.
Who
and then what?
Well, the Who is hard. I mean, I would have to put a region on it. It just seems like the Texas, Louisiana region of the U.S. always seems to be something I really, when I hear it, it has an effect on me.
There was a song, there was Louisiana, Gator, and
yes, that was Terrebonne, Blackwater Buff.
Yeah, that's to let you know, I really like the flow of the song. I love that one.
That's a blues song all the way in the way it's written and the lyrics. It changes a bit at about 3 minutes. The whole kind of feel changes. It becomes a little harder than blues. Yeah, which is what I wanted to do. But I didn't want to just put Terrebonne on the album. I felt like, so I wrote Blackwater Buff later. Maybe 2 years later, the third track on the album. And I wanted to just do a solo version of Terrebonne, just me and a guitar, to really bring out what I felt like was to really bring out the blues nature of it. And and I got a review of it where a guy called it a Southern slink, like a Tony Joe White Southern slink, and I was happy about that because that's kind of what I was shooting for on that song. Totally different feel than Terrebonne, which is also on the album, which is my band, the Woodshed. We did trio. The drums weren't on there. I don't use drums usually on my albums.
Is that a conscious, creative choice?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a creative choice. I feel like it gets in the way of the feel a lot of times. And I'm not trying to, your drummers out there, don't get mad at me. I don't have a problem with drummers. I have a drummer in my band. He's great. And it's just how I feel about my acoustic projects.
I think I can see how the absence of drums really enhances the experience or enhances your music, because the very first one I listened to was the song with and it arrested me. It just seemed like this is a grizzled veteran.
Which song was it? Prowlin Lobo?
Yeah, the one. Okay. Yeah, like the grizzled veteran who's got something to say. You want to hear what he's got to say, and I can imagine maybe drums might have interfered with that.
Yeah, I mean, I may be a little bit. I could be a little overboard with the whole thing. I don't know, but it's how I feel, and so I go with it.
Yeah.
But also, one of my influence, you asked me about musical influences. One of the big ones, it's hard for me to say who's the biggest, but definitely one of the big ones was Hal Lightning Hopkins out of Texas, old blues player. And I think he's one of the biggest influences I have on my guitar playing. What he did, because he played solo most of the time during his career. He wasn't with bands too much. So the way he played his guitar was he had a percussive element to his guitar. He would mute a lot as he strummed. There'd be a lot of muting going on, and he'd hit the bass strings a lot. So you'd actually have a guitar, a drum, a percussion sound, and a bit of a bass sound just in what he was doing. And that's how he kept it interesting, his solo shows, along with a lot of stories he would tell. And that's how he kept his people there, his audience there. And I think it influenced me because I mute a lot, palm mute a lot when I play. And I use, if it's especially a harder, heavier song, I'm using a pick that is very, very light gauge. Very light gauge. Guys will come up and say, "Can I borrow your pick?" And I give them my pick, and I can't use this. It's like a piece of paper. But it makes a sound on the strings, and with the muting, you get this kind of a little percussive sound going on the guitar playing. And so there is a percussive element in there already. That may be one of the reasons why I don't use the drums.
I appreciate the craft better. I was because it's easy to miss this subtle details and nuances of the playing, because listeners just hear the whole thing, but what has gone into it. And I do appreciate the journey into what happens behind the scenes.
Well, I know the listeners, it's all about feel. And it's all about feel for me too. If I don't feel it, I'm not gonna put it out there in the first place, And I get that question, why? Because I'll play a lot of dark songs too, and why don't you just play happier songs? Because I'll play what I'm obsessed with, and then I'll be able to, if I do that, I'll be able to perform it with a lot more feel,
authenticity,
and that will transfer to the crowd.
Now, the Prowlin Lobo, why did you choose that name?
Well, I chose Prowlin Lobo as the name of the song, and Prowlin Lobo Blues is the name of the album, and it's the first song on the album because it to me represented the album. Because if you go through and you listen to all these songs, your idea before about movement is a central thing with this album. If you listen, Itinerant Blues is about movement. Working on the Blues is about street performers moving around. And if you listen to the lyrics, there's lots of different, geographically, a lot of different places are mentioned. And so the wolf is running, it's a metaphor for, could be a wolf, could be a man. But I felt like Prowlin Lobo represented the feel and what I wanted from that album, and all the songs followed kind of fit into the whole, there's some sort of movement going on here. There's trains, there's wolves running, something is going on. It's traveler, the road. So I think it fit that. That's why I went first.
Now that you mention it, there's a mariachi band, a famous mariachi band in Mexico. I think they are Los Lobos.
Yeah.
And they have this unique style of no, they are not mariachi. I think they are norteña. The style of the guitar style is norteña, and it just struck me. There's something about Lobos that appeals to musicians.
The history of songs are very strange things. I mean, Prowlin Lobo started when the Woodshed one night we were playing at Modernista. I think it was the first time we'd ever played there. This was back 5 years ago.
At Modernista?
Yeah, my band, the Woodshed. And we got an encore call at the end of the show. We didn't have a song at that time because the band was pretty young at the time. I made it up right there on stage. I just started playing this rhythm, and I just started singing these words that I had just never thought of, and just kind of made it up. And that's where it began. But that's a much more harder, very very hard rock version, and of course the words the first time we played it, some of them were the same, but not very many of them. And so it evolved in the band and became a very hard rock type. You can call it blues because it's blues, 12-bar blues, but it's also hard rock. When I went to create for this album, I didn't want to put it on the album that way. I didn't feel like it represented the rest of the album or me the right way. And I said this is a bluegrass song. We can put a banjo on here and a mandolin, and so that's how it ends up being the way it is now on the album. If you go listen to it with the band, it's a totally different thing.
Now you mentioned bluegrass. What is the difference, if any, between blues
and bluegrass,
other than the region where they came out from?
Right. Well, bluegrass instrumentation is different from. I mean, the banjo and the mandolin are prominent in bluegrass, and the way it's played I'm not sure I can tell you in depth about this.
Well, I mean, just in general, because I don't know.
Well, it comes out of the mountains, and the mountain people a lot of times will just sit around and play. They get very good on their instruments because they'll sit there in the mountains and play a lot. So to me, it's coming from a different demographic, right? It's coming from the mountain folks who are primarily white people, I think, in the U.S. when it started, whereas blues is coming from the South and the black people primarily when it started. And of course, it's a different socioeconomic thing, you know. And so blues, in my opinion, when it first began in the U.S., I mean, it was for a reason, like to get together and just in the evenings or whatever, to get together and pour out your problems through music, you know. And of course, they had a lot of problems, you know. But it was a way to pour out your problems. And so that's another reason I say, you know, blues, yeah, okay, you're pouring out your problems, and it's a sad thing, but it's also happy because you're able to do this with other people and know you're not the only one with the problem, you know, and you can come together and bond and identify with each other. That, to me, that's a happy thing.
It's a celebration of humanity, the connection, the community.
It may not come from the best reason, but a lot of things in life don't. And it's what you do with your situation, you know, that will matter later on, I think. Whereas bluegrass, I don't think I've never lived in the mountains, I don't know, but I don't think they were coming from the same kind of place when they were learning to play bluegrass. I'm not sure the place they were coming from, because mountain people are also very poor. They didn't have, I mean, it wasn't like they didn't have problems. They had problems, they just had different problems. So I don't know if that's the answer. I don't know, but...
Well, I mean, it does explain it.
Amazingly talented people in bluegrass. It's just amazing, the technical ability of bluegrass musicians, to me, is just incredible. A lot different than blues in the sense that blues, like I said, you could play 2 notes a bar, or even 1 note a bar. B.B. King used to do this and talk about it. And they ask him, well, why do you do that? And he's like, well, one, if your 1 note or 2 notes are effective, they're going to feel it more than 20 fast notes. And 2, I guess I get paid more now for each note. Making a joke, you know. But bluegrass is almost the opposite. Like they're just flying along with 100 notes a second or something. You know, I mean, it's amazing.
Some finger dexterity on display.
And harmonies are great in bluegrass too. I love bluegrass.
You mentioned earlier that you like to go with the flow, just the inspiration leads the process. Is it the same for your videos? You do have an interesting take on music videos. Is it the same? How do you decide the story or the videos that accompany the songs?
Well, that's a more collaborative process. When with the videographer, really, I knew, because the trains were a big, you know, piece of this album, that I wanted to find old train tracks in Beijing, the defunct tracks that aren't being used. You know, I don't want to be
the perfect location to get that.
And I ended up hooking up with Graham Nicole, who is the videographer. He shot the video, and he also was one of the editors on the video, who came through Brad Seipel, who is the producer of this album and produced the first album. He actually had pretty good beat on where these old train tracks were. I think he just wanders around and walks around, he finds these things, you know. And that was really helpful, because we would go out and We go out to these old tracks that aren't being used and shoot the videos. So it's a very collaborative process. And then as the shooting happened and then we got into editing, I found that we would kind of go back and forth. Like he'd do a first edit and I'd look at it. And in the meantime, we'd come up with ideas for how we wanted to edit it, how the color, if you like the Moose Jaw video is has a certain color to it. It's a little more of a rustic color that's been laid on it, and that is to try and match the feel, So those ideas were very collaborative. Graham comes up with really good ideas, and I'm very hands-on about everything in music, so I have a few ideas here and there too, but I think it's a very collaborative thing, And we had more than one editor. We had other editors because there's 13 videos. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work because I know even several artists just shoot 3 or 4 videos for the song. So am I detecting that you enjoy the video the video shooting process as well, the shooting process?
The shooting process?
Yes.
It's hard. I think it's hard, man. You go out there and it's like you're 5-6 hours and you got elements like.
But then you did it 13 times.
Well, no, we would shoot multiple videos in one day.
Oh.
Like we'd do 3 or 4 videos, and I would play to these videos. But you had a lot of things. Like we had a big storm come up where it was a rough storm. We thought we thought maybe this was the end with the lightning and hail and everything. And it can be tiring, I think, shooting. But what happened was I liked the process better than I thought I was going to like it in the beginning, especially the editing and the idea generating, and also just communicating with different editors. I mean, we had my guitar player edited 2, Mike Meslenikoff, Jong San edited 1, Nina DeLinz edited 1. So we had different people editing. Graham did the bulk of them. And I even did a couple of my own, which are kind of the low res ones. But they had to be if you didn't spread it out, it would have took just too long.
I think editing is one task that teaches patience like no other.
And also those files are really big. This is something I didn't understand or wasn't thinking too much about. The size of the files are really big, and they can be very hard to deal with. That's the technical things, that I don't really like or want to get involved with, but I did get involved with them, and overall I think the process was it definitely, I learned a lot from it, and I thought the videos came out great.
I can second that motion.
Now I'm very happy we did those videos. I don't know if I'll do it in the future, if I'll do videos for the whole album or not, but I'm glad we did. First album, there's 13 songs. I think 6 of them have videos now, and then there's going to be another one coming out soon.
Now, you've been in China for how long?
11 years.
11 years. Wow.
Yep.
That's non-trivial.
Not at all, man. It's kind of amazing.
What was the reception for blues? Let me rephrase that. How did you find the blues scene in China, if there was one when you came?
There's a blues scene. I think actually in Beijing it's not bad, the blues scene. I mean, it's thin. There's not like tons of people doing blues, but you've got some foreigners doing blues. You got Chinese doing blues. There's a couple of blues bands, Chinese blues bands here who play a lot and have done well, and they host a jam over at Jianghu Bar. They have a blues jam. There's just other individual people who have a bluesy sound too, play blues solo. I feel like it's not bad. I don't have a problem finding blues in Beijing. If I want to go out and just hear some blues, I usually can. I think when you get to smaller areas, there's no blues. We did teach some blues classes down in Shandong a few years ago because there's no blues there. So we're trying to introduce it a little bit. I think there's a little more blues in Beijing than people would intuitively think.
That's something that I've experienced a lot in China or Beijing. You find things more vibrant and abundant than you would have thought. That's why I asked that question, because I mean I stumble or I dabble into blues every now and then, but I wouldn't describe myself as an avid listener. But seeing you and seeing the work that's gone into your album, the videos, you must have a large base even to find the players, the band, and so I'm like, how deep is the scene here? That's what's going on in my head.
How deep is it? I wouldn't say it's so deep, but I won't have any problem finding somebody to listen to some blues if I want to here. And that can come in the form of a trio, foreign trio band, a foreign full band, a solo Chinese full blues band. And some of them, in my opinion, are much more pure, the traditional pure type of blues than I am. People say I'm blues. I definitely do blues songs, but I do a lot of other kind of things, and that's something I want to do. I want to do a lot of other kind of things. I would get bored if I just kept playing the same 12-bar blues all the time.
So, do you play other instruments apart from the harmonica? You mentioned harmonica, the guitar.
Well, I mean, if you want to call it playing, I play harmonica. It's pretty basic. I play washboard too. It's definitely pretty basic. I mean, guitar is the main instrument. I did play washboard and harmonica on this album. It was more of my own little challenge thing, Like, I wanted to play a couple of other instruments, and they seemed to fit. Moose Jaw has all three on it.
And you played the three?
I play on Moose Jaw. I play guitar, harmonica, and washboard.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we have a double bass player, Picard Rosie, playing double bass on Moose Jaw. So it's just me and him. It's actually a duo, Moose Jaw. And that's another thing about the album. You've got 5 solo songs. You've got I can't remember, but 2 or 3 duos, 2 or 3 trios, and then there's a couple songs that have full band. So it runs the gamut of from solo to like 5 people on a song.
What would you consider the most important part of your creative process? We've touched on it a little bit, but if you had to pinpoint one thing, what would you say it is?
Staying away from corporate environments. That'll take right out of me, man. When I was in New York, I worked for companies and corporations, and I found I just couldn't be creative. It just wouldn't work. It would just take it right out of my mind. Plus, and also, you're working all day. You're at an office working all day. That kind of thing will just mess it up. And that's one thing. And the other thing is I just need to keep honest about my own feelings about things, whether it's good, bad, ugly, whatever. And if I do that, then I think it's the hardest thing in the world for people to look at themselves. This is something I learned over the years. It's the hardest thing in the world for a person to look at themselves because they're afraid to do it, because maybe they're looking at things they don't like. It's important if you're going to bring it out in a creative way. You need to look at yourself, and understand what's inside you. You'll be much more likely to be able to bring things out in a good way, feeling way, an honest way. So those are important.
Well, looks like we're going to be ending on a philosophical note.
Alan Stradamus. Something like that.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you, taking around your beautiful mind, your beautiful creative process, and drinking from your fountain, as it were. And I'd go listen to your album again.
I hope everybody can get a chance to listen to Prowlin Lobo Blues. That's the most recent album that came out here in 2023. It's available all over the place. It's available on Bandcamp, YouTube videos, everywhere you find music, you can find Prowlin Lobo Blues.
So that would be all for this episode. Thank you for staying with us, and we hope you join us next time.